Here's Ticky Fullerton on Your Money.
Yes, hello there, I'm Ticky Fullerton. Every night bringing you a full hour of the very best in business coverage across the nation and internationally, especially where business and politics meet. Coming up, out with the hubris and out with the remuneration report for NAB as the bank gets a blistering 80% first strike against its REM report. All the analysis from the AGMs of NAB and ANZ, and today's news that APRA is lifting the interest-only lending cap. The year of the regulator. ACCC Chief Rod Sims joins me for a special chat on an extraordinary year for the consumer and competition regulator, a year of corporate jockeying, royal commissions and government intervention. What are the ground rules that keep the ACCC on track? And if you're a business leader, how fluid is your thinking? What does it matter to your business and outcomes and achievements? And can you really do something about it? We'll talk to enigmaFIT CEO and cognitive scientist Phillip Campbell. Right, I might have a drink in a minute, but anyway, see how we go. Well, he certainly did pick a day for it, didn't he? The recalcitrant views of the New South Wales State Energy Minister, Don Harwin, was splashed across one of our two national newspapers today, the Financial Review. Under the heading, New South Wales Libs split from Morrison, Mr Harwin claims the federal government is out of touch on energy and climate policy, which is preventing new investment and prices from falling. It's time for them to change course. Now, it's frankly pretty unhelpful for the Feds and particularly unhelpful for Federal Energy Minister Angus Taylor, who is meeting with state ministers in Adelaide today to help settle his energy plans. Let's be maybe stronger than that. It was deliberately timed. Here's Mr Harwin this morning ahead of COAG making the helpful suggestion that the Feds should now be adding an emissions element to their price and reliability commitment.
Well, look, today we're putting emissions reduction back on the table where it should be. We need a circuit breaker. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I'm going to argue today for work to start on the drafting of an emissions obligation to complement the reliability obligation that we're working on today.
Now this, of course, is grist for the mill for Labor. Bill Shorten has re-emerged with a new version of the NEG that deals with the trilemma of cost, reliability and emissions, not just the dilemma that the Feds are focusing on. Well, this morning, Victorian Labor Energy Minister Lily D'Ambrosio jumped on Don Harwin's op-ed spray. She said we could possibly say they're beyond hope. They have still no plan, still no policy on energy and climate change. This morning, Federal Energy Minister was steely as he went into meetings and very much on the down message.
This is about making sure that we have supply in the market, in the electricity market, years ahead of time to put downward pressure on prices and to keep the lights on. It's an absolutely central agenda item amongst others to make sure we've got enough supply in the market, to make sure every Australian business and household family gets a fair price for electricity.
Well, as the meeting broke up just a short while ago, we got a window on just how tense it was. The Sydney Morning Herald is quoting one insider as saying Angus Taylor was sweating blood at Don Harwin's proposal to put an emissions obligation into national energy policy. He knocked it back, the minister did, on procedural grounds. Well, that completely stifled debate. The minister himself has declared he came out with exactly what he wanted, a commitment on reliability. And what about price? Well, we hope to talk to the minister a little later in the show from Adelaide all about this. But this Don Harwin intervention is troubling for the Feds on at least two levels, I think. Firstly, the idea that whatever focus group work led the government to believe that it was price and reliability and not emissions that Aussie voters cared about, that idea is now wobbly. The Wentworth by-election sent a clear message on that front. Climate change called out as high in the minds of voters. And remember, it was the dislodged Prime Minister, the former member for Wentworth, Malcolm Turnbull, who put the ministerial portfolios of energy and climate change together. Today, the Morrison government has set them apart again. And then there's the landslide victory for Daniel Andrews and Victorian State Labor since Wentworth, with its huge emphasis on renewables. That would be even more disturbing for Scott Morrison. Secondly, and perhaps even more concerning for Camp Morrison, is that it's becoming pretty clear that the Berejiklian state government sees their federal comrades as not positive but a negative factor in the upcoming state elections in March. Bottom line, Don Harwin went as far as to say today that Scott Morrison and the leadership team were out of touch with voters. The contrast with Labour's discipline and unity at its ALP federal conference, also in Adelaide this week, is pretty startling, isn't it? Right, well, let's kick off with some regulation. 2018 must surely be the year for the potent competition and consumer regulator, the ACCC. And what a big year it's been for its chairman, Rod Sims. We've recently seen the watchdog take on the airlines for misleading customers. There's also been a blitz on telcos for dodgy contracts, a crack at the ports. Meanwhile, still managing to weigh in on some of the year's mega mergers. It's also been a pretty good year for cash injections to investigate all this cartel conduct and monitor energy prices. Well, speaking of energy, 2018 also sparked the big stick debate. How much power is too much power for a government? But perhaps the biggest development for the ACCC this year has been the regulator taking on the international tech behemoths, Google and Facebook, for soaking up the lion's share of digital advertising in revenue in Australia. So how did Rod Sims and his team manage to tackle all of this in just 1 year? Well, ACCC Chairman Rod Sims in the flesh joins me live at the desk. Rod, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, this year we have been talking about the regulators, all of you. Why do you think that is? Is it bad behaviour?
I think it's a bit to do with bad behaviour. I think that I mean, we've just been doing what we always do in terms of taking companies to court to send messages, and we've had some much bigger penalties this year, which has put the spotlight on some of those cases.
But the number of cases, it seems like you've been in overdrive.
Yes, well, look, I'm afraid, responding to demand. I think there has been examples of companies treating their customers very badly. So whenever I hear statements that companies only succeed by looking after their customers, I must say that's not what I'm seeing in corporate Australia. And so most of the actions we take are when companies are treating their customers badly.
Any of the most egregious ones you could point to?
Oh, look, it's hard to single them out, really, Ticky. I mean, if I just look on the consumer side, the Ford Motor Company telling people who had cars with a power shift transmission that it wasn't the transmission's fault, it was their driving style, when they really knew it was the car's fault. They were just trying to get out of trying to look after their customers, I'd put it in my terms. Telstra premium direct billing, 10,000 complaints a month, didn't do anything about it until we came along. Heinz trying to sell the parents of 1 to 3 year olds healthy eating products when they're 68% sugar. I mean, it's not good. So
if I came to it from the other direction, can I ask you what you would think of your most important decision this year, do you think?
Oh, that's a tough one. I really find that difficult, Ticky, because you've got the merger decisions and, you know, we did struggle with what was the right decision in Transurban WestConnex. We're convinced we made the right decision, but we had a journey to go through. 9 Fairfax was a tricky one as well. Again, we're convinced we made the right decision, but it took a lot of time and a lot of agonising. Taking on the criminal cartel matters, but also wrapping our mind around what we're going to recommend in some of these market studies. I mean, the recommendations on the electricity study were deeply thought about. I mean, I just personally spent a lot of time on it. Digital platforms, the same. So
and I guess it's not just an isolated decision, it's a decision and then how a market should operate going forward in many of these cases.
That's right. I mean, the market studies, I think, fill a real gap. In our enforcement work, and to some extent our mergers work, we're reactive. It's what comes to us when we see a breach of the Act. But I think a regulator such as ourselves, we have to also be proactive. When markets aren't working well, it's just no good for Australia or for us, our reputation, to say, oh, I can't see a breach of the Act. You may not see a breach of the Act, but you do see a market working badly, and then I think proactive work is very helpful.
Something that's happened clearly in the last 12 months is a much higher level of government intervention in markets when government, maybe they feel pressure from the grassroots, feel it's necessary for them to step in. How difficult has that made life for you?
Look, not difficult, I think, because, I mean, clearly you don't want pendulums to swing too far. But we have had pendulum swings where we've, you know, deregulated monopoly infrastructure, and I think that's cost Australian companies and the economy a lot of money.
So you're talking about, for example, the ports?
Well, the ports are an example, that's right, and the NCC's decision today to recommend deregulation of the Port of Newcastle, I think, is a most unfortunate and very concerning recommendation. But also in terms of the way the regulatory structure works around companies. To some extent, the companies have brought it on themselves. You think about the Food and Grocery Code. Where did that come from? It came from Coles basically saying to its suppliers, pay me money, which I've got no entitlement to, by the end of the day, or I'll delist your goods. I mean, that's dreadful.
But
so
going
I think
back
companies
to
have invited a fair bit of this.
Right, but going back to the government intervention, you've now got a situation where, I mean, you know, what would worry you, for example, around the NBN? Because ideally for customers, one would think if government somehow could find a way to write down the NBN, that might allow cheaper numbers to flow through. Equally, if they try to sell it, they've got to get a high price.
Well, no, they don't, Ticky. I mean, that is the thinking that I'm doing a very bad job of trying to change. I know the financial press thinks the more you get for the sale, the better. But from the economy's point of view, it's the reverse. I mean, if you know, we've built the NBN. It's in a couple of years going to be a sunk cost.
Yes. Right.
The money's gone. The money's been spent. The resources have been allocated. What do we want now, Australia? We want the best use of this infrastructure. A once-off extra $10 billion. I know it sounds a lot of money. You and I might quite like it, but it's nothing compared to using the infrastructure properly and efficiently. And that's the message I'm doing a very bad job of getting out there.
Well, to the government, I mean, the government has its own views. I mean, the government has decided to use this big stick over and above what you recommended in terms of its ability to break up energy companies as a threat. How do you think that is impacting the market, this big stick?
Oh, look, that's a policy issue that's hotly debated out there.
Well, clearly you didn't support it.
It's not what we recommended. I mean, we're now been given a 7-year role in electricity. We've got our recommendations out there, which I should emphasise stand separate from emissions, separate from reliability. Affordability is its own topic, and it's just very bad public policy to confuse the three. There's 3 issues out there, you need 3 different approaches to address them. We've got our recommendations out there that can get down electricity prices by 25%, and we will keep advocating. Public policy is a long game. All right. Ticky, we're not going anywhere.
Let me ask you about a huge job that you had to do, which was the digital platform review. How did you do that from a standing start? Because I mean, I don't think it's any secret you're not a particularly big social media user yourself, are you?
No, but like everything, I've got some pretty excellent staff, and we gathered people who were very good at this.
You had a team of about 30, didn't you?
No, we had a team of about 12 or 13.
Oh, 12 or 13, right.
But I guess, to be fair, that's the core team. They were supported by lawyers and economists, so put them all together, it might, give or take a bit, get closer to 20.
Yes.
But we had people who understand the technology very well. We had people who can analyse data as well, to some extent, understand algorithms very well.
Yes.
And we had some good policy people. But first and foremost, Ticky, what we're good at is investigating.
Yes.
You know, what's the problem? What's the solution? What information do we need? We send out those delightful little information notices, and we get to the bottom of it.
So,
I mean, it's just classic problem solving.
What do you say to this? I spoke to Graham Samuel, your predecessor, several months ago, and he has a completely different view about the role of the regulator. And one of the things he thinks that regulators shouldn't be doing is policy making. He says regulators love to be policy makers. They love to be thinking they're going to save the world and change policy. That's not their remit. That's why I've always been cautious about the conduct by regulators of market studies or market analyses. And he said that he thinks the Productivity Commission should have been doing this work on the digital platforms. It's not a job for the ACCC. Look,
difference of view. I've got differences of view with both of my predecessors. Alan Fells is very keen on divestment, and I've got a different view, which you mentioned earlier. And yes, Graham has a very, I guess, almost traditional view that the regulator should be seen and not heard. It should be just pouncing when someone breaks the law. I have a very different view. I think the regulator's got to be not just reactive, but proactive. I mean, to not utilise the skills we've got is a loss for the economy.
Even though the skills could be there in the Productivity Commission?
I think the difference is the Productivity Commission doesn't use the information gathering notices.
Yes.
So I just don't see how you can do a digital platform inquiry without a continuing series of information gathering notices. That's what we use very well.
Facebook and Google, FANG, might accuse you of industry capture, of course. Do you worry about industry capture?
Oh, well, see, the beauty of us, Ticky, is we can't be captured by any industry because we deal with everybody.
Yeah. So you don't see it as a risk, or are you constantly wary of it?
I don't see it as a risk because we're dealing with one industry one day, another industry. Well, we're dealing with 15 industries a day. And so there's no industry we're constantly dealing with. So I don't see how capture can occur. That's a risk when you've got a regulator with a single market focus. We don't have that problem, Ticky. We're looking at everyone.
You do things differently to the other regulators we see, APRA and ASIC. I mean, you're obliged, I think, to use the courts much more than, say, enforceable undertakings. You've got a really interesting case. You had one victory with a criminal cartel. You've got this bank cartel case coming up next year. Why didn't you give them a heads up and a warning? Why have you gone straight to court? Because it is quite unusual. This is the sort of thing that's been going on in syndications for years, isn't it?
I don't think so, Ticky. Whenever anybody's said that, we've said, oh, could you please tell us about those other occasions? I think what you've seen here is unique, but I can't get into the details anymore.
But the reason they might not tell you is precisely because it's been going on for ages. So back to my question of why didn't you give them a heads up first?
Look, our model is we're absolutely not the compliance department of any company or any group of companies. Their job is to comply with the law. Our job is to deal with it when they don't. Now look, there are times when we give people warnings. Absolutely, we've done that. We try to educate people about the law. But if people breach the law and all we do is say, you better stop that or else, they'll stop it and they'll go off and do something else, knowing that there's no penalty. You know, do what you like. The ACCC will knock on the door and say, don't do it again. That's no way to work. No, our job is to take people to court, hit them hard, send a message. We can't, as a cross-sector regulator, we've got to hit hard, send messages. That's the only way we're going to get respect for the law.
Finally, because I have to wrap up for time, but when you come and think about TPG Vodafone, for example, or maybe you'll be thinking about Sigma API down the track, there is a balance between competition and the consumer. And some of these cases, those two examples being a case in point, the players would argue that they're going to really struggle to survive unless they are bigger. But you would tend to have the view, it seems to me, that the consumer comes first. Am I right?
Well, we're here to look after competition and the consumer. In these merger cases, they are totally aligned. I know, again, and I'm not having a shot here, the financial press, I mean, the commentary...
Have a shot.
The commentary on the TPG Vodafone's been fantastic. The financial press has said ACCC, our recent statement of issues, bad for the telco sector, right? Profits will be down for the telco sector. That's not our concern. I mean, the best merger partner for any company is your closest competitor. Our job is not to let that happen. So we're not here to protect company profits, we're here to protect competition and consumers, which when it comes to mergers is exactly the same thing. So I understand the financial press doesn't like our decisions because it sometimes means lower profits for the companies they report on, but I'm sorry, our role is to protect competition and the consumers, and that's precisely what we will do.
Rod Sims, I do hope you get a bit of a break. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks, Ticky.
Now, after the break, a big day for ANZ and NAB, with each bank receiving a first strike against remuneration at today's AGMs. We'll get the lowdown from Your Money Chief Business Reporter Leo Shanahan next.
You're watching Ticky on Your Money. Now, back to Ticky.
Welcome back. Well, now let's catch up with the two very big AGMs today, two big banks. And joining me at the desk, Leo Shanahan, our Chief Business Reporter. Leo, tell me what happened. It was quite tense, the NAB one first.
Yeah, so you've got a record strike against the NAB, over 80, I think in the end it was 87% of shareholders voting against the REM report. So that's extraordinary. That's a record.
Ken Henry knew
banks
about
and
that
corporate
ahead,
Australia.
and so his mood was very different, wasn't it?
They knew about this, obviously, because of the pre-poll votes coming through. But look, it's an extraordinary result for NAB that caps off what has been a disastrous year, frankly, from beginning to end. It's not over yet. Let's not rule out another scandal with days to go. But yes, Ken Henry's tone was much more apologetic. But firstly, let's just get an idea from the shareholders themselves, the type of anger that was being directed towards the board.
Okay.
The board and senior management are failed capitalists. You have destroyed billions and billions of dollars of value, and that can't continue.
I'd have to say to you, I think his interim report was one of the best such documents I have read. It was very lucid, it was persuasive, it was considered, it challenged all of us. I expect the final report of the Royal Commission to be of at least that standard. I think the Royal Commission, the Commissioner particularly, but also Senior Counsel and Counsel Assisting, are people of outstanding quality, doing an unbelievably difficult job.
So Ken Henry there, who was widely criticised for his approach to his evidence in front of the Royal Commission today, very praiseworthy of
saying
Ken
not
Hayne.
only Ken Hayne, but also Rowena Orr did a great job as well.
What a fantastic report it was.
Yeah, well, bear in mind, these are the people that are going to be inputting into the February 1st final report that's going to dictate banking in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, the overall, I think the strike issue is one thing. I mean, whether that translates to anything in the future is another question. But this is a point that shareholders can make. This is where they can direct their anger towards a strike on the REM report, and no amount of fiddling with the with the remuneration structure was going to quell that anger. It was, as they'd say in political terms, I think it was waiting for them. They were waiting for them with baseball bats, I think.
So, what about the other issue around Andrew Thorburn, the court case, the fact that he's taking time off? Yeah,
so there was discussion initially about the court case and the investigation, as we've revealed details of, into Rosemary Rogers, Andrew Thorburn's former Chief of Staff. And look, have a look at Ken Henry's response to questions about that investigation.
Principal reason, we think, for the fraud being able to be perpetrated is that we place too much trust in somebody. But that's what it looks like. We have to guard against that. It's a terrible conclusion to have to come to.
There is some huge dollop of irony there, that word trust, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, massive. I mean, that's what the banks have been on about, and here they have been betrayed.
Yeah, well, that's
Ken Henry's words.
The manner where it's being painted. So far, we don't know. No charges have been laid, of course, and if no one's accusing Andrew Thorburn of any wrongdoing. But of course, it's an appalling look, as I've said before, and it's not just the criminal activity that's, well, potential criminal activity that's taken place. It's the fact it goes to the broader question of banking largesse, if these trips have been taken, etc. But look, on the issue of leave, he was asked about this, and he said, look, It has been, you know, a tough year, he said. He's taking January off. He's coming back to oversee the Royal Commission response and then taking a month of long service leave. And he said, look, it's there to be taken. Basically, if there is an argument, if people are stressed or exhausted, it's there to be taken. Now, he said, basically, I've been in managing director roles for banks for almost 10 years because he was head of the New Zealand Bank before that.
Yes.
And, you
but
know...
we have to conclude here that he's stressed and exhausted, because otherwise a responsible CEO at that particular time in this bank's life would not be going off for 4 weeks.
I really emphasise the word stressed and exhausted were my words, but it's somewhat evident.
But to actually say, oh, look, we all need to take long service leave because it needs to be taken. I mean, yeah, but this is a crucial time.
Yeah, it's
so
pretty
it is quite interesting. Now, what about ANZ? Because we were surprised about that. I wasn't sort of... Well, I thought there were going to be 2 REM strikes among the 4 banks, and I wasn't convinced that ANZ, or at least we weren't talking about ANZ as necessarily one going to strike, but
ANZ did 34%, so they've got a strike, so that's 3 out of 4. And keeping in mind, the CBA only avoided one because of the drastic action they took across the board. But have a look at David Gonski earlier today.
Approximately 66% of the votes have been in favour of the report. The board would like to thank those shareholders for their support in what has been a difficult year. However, this means at this stage that 40% have voted against, and as a consequence, as a first strike occurs if 25% vote against, we face a first strike at this meeting.
Yeah, so actually closer to 40% in the end. But yes, so look, a big day for the banks. It's started bad year, and it's ended in the same vein.
I should just mention some good news for the property market, do you think?
Well, maybe. I mean, you can't help but think, of course, APRA today lifting the cap on interest-only loans, that 30% limit on new interest-only loans, as well as confirming that 10% on investor property loans will also be lifted. They've said that a couple of months ago, but they've confirmed that the banks have complied with the standards there. So look, APRA say, you know, oh, we're not interested in the housing market, but you can't help but think they've relented to some pressure here around the housing market, and also if they say, well, the job's been done. So look, it'd be interesting in February and March whether those sales pick up.
Sure will. Leo Shanahan, thank you for all that. OK, after the break, fluid thinking, unpacking the latest way we're being told we can change our brains. enigmaFIT CEO Phillip Campbell next.
This is Ticky on Your Money, covering the big business stories.
Welcome back. Well, it just keeps getting worse for disgraced MP Andrew Broad, with Nationals leader Michael McCormack today conceding that scandal has damaged his party. For more on the latest, Sky News political reporter Annalise Nielsen joins me live from Canberra. Annalise, in what way has it got worse?
Well, it can't really get much worse for Andrew Broad, can it? He's lost his career, basically, but now the timeline just keeps getting worse about when he let the party know. And we've had Michael McCormack say today that he doesn't think Mr Broad was upfront with the details about exactly what happened. And of course that's important because that affected whether he told the Prime Minister or not. It was a huge blow to the Liberal Party when this story broke on the morning of my EFO, when they wanted the headlines to be about finally getting the budget back into surplus next year, and instead everything was about Andrew Broad's indiscretions with this woman he met on a sugar daddy website, which a lot of people around Canberra hadn't heard about until yesterday.
A lot of people generally haven't heard about it either.
We've had to spend a lot of time on explaining the sugar daddy concept, that it is something where you're expected to lay out the goods for your partner you meet online and then perhaps go from there. He does insist that there was no indiscretion in his marriage, that still it doesn't bode well for his family. But his wife has been seen out with him since this whole scandal broke and does appear to be supporting him, so it is something where there's something to salvage there. But for the Nationals, it is an ongoing problem that they've had with how they deal with women. Right now, there's 22 Nationals in Parliament and only 2 of them are women, and so Mr McCormack's made a few references to how he's consulted with both his female MPs. It's not going very well on that count, and he has had to defend the fact that he didn't tell the Prime Minister when he knew for weeks that New Idea had this story and was going to run it.
Yeah, so
There's been a dent, yes. I'm the first to admit that. We're working hard to making sure that we restore that trust and faith in us, and I spend every waking day of my life making sure that I put the Nationals forward, making sure that we are our best selves, and making sure that women know that we are the party of best choice for them in rural and regional areas.
Yeah, well, good luck with that at the moment. But I mean, in terms of actually replacing him, I mean, you say there was no indiscretion. I mean, I think the indiscretion is clear by the very fact that he was looking at this website in the first place. But in terms of who the women are that might replace, presumably there's an opportunity to get a woman into that seat, isn't there?
That is the push from the Nationals Party. They're saying that they do want a woman to at least have the chance to run, but a lot of the discussion has been around whether Bridget McKenzie will take the seat. We know before she became a Victorian senator, she had a few unsuccessful attempts at getting pre-selected for the Nationals in different seats, but if she did move, it would put her in leadership contention, and that's really important for the Nationals right now, because they do really have a problem with women in the country, especially given that their platform is conservative family values, and they haven't really been living up to that this year, including the Barnaby Joyce scandal and then finishing it on this. So it is something that they do have to do a bit of work. And so it will be interesting to see whether she does get a run. There are some local names being floated around as well, and we know the Nationals are quite parochial. They do want to see someone who's had that local presence, and so the fact that that Bridget McKenzie spent more time in the north-east of Victoria might not bode too well for her.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm just wondering, the National Party themselves now, they've had such a hammering, haven't they? First with Barnaby Joyce and now with Andrew Broad. And, you know, they're going into the prospects of possibly not being in government by, say, mid-next year. Is there talk around what should be reformed within the National Party?
Well, there has been quite a bit of talk about their pre-selection processes, as there has been within the Liberal Party, but there is actually a risk right now of a bit of cannibalising in the coalition. There's been talk about potentially the Liberals running their own candidate in the seat. It's generally something they don't do in their coalition ranks, but it's seen as, in an instance like this where someone has had to leave in disgrace, that it is thrown wide open, and so there is possibility of a three-man race, potentially a three-woman race, you never know, but it's something where the Nationals, I think there's going to be a lot of introspection on this point, even if they're not being too publicly open about the discussion.
All right, Annalise Nielsen, thank you very much for all that. And now to somebody who I suppose could have been part of the National Party but ended up very much a Liberal. Federal Energy Minister Angus Taylor was today seeking to secure an agreement on the retailer reliability obligation at the COAG meeting, but his task was made all the much harder today given his Liberal state colleague from the largest state, actually, New South Wales, has criticised him ahead of those talks. How did it all play out in the meeting? Well, delighted to say Minister for Energy Angus Taylor joins me live from Adelaide just before he gets on the plane. Angus Taylor, thank you so much for joining me. Now, can I put to you first that your shadow, Mark Butler, said today that Scott Morrison stands completely isolated in his refusal to implement the NEG, opposed by every single business group in the nation, and now deserted by even his own New South Wales Liberal Party colleagues.
Well, Ticky, today we got the retailer reliability obligation agreed, which has been a long time coming. This is a major reform. It's a crucial part of what we've been seeking to do for a long time, and what it means in practice is we'll get lower prices because we'll have supply planned, invested well ahead of time, ensuring that if supply leaves the market, it's replaced, ensuring that every Australian can get a fair deal on their energy prices. Of course, the other part of this discussion, what Mark Butler is talking about, is emission reductions, and we released numbers earlier this week showing that we'll reach our 26% emission reduction target, which is scheduled for 2030. We're going to reach it in the early 2020s, 2022, 2023. So we are delivering the outcomes, and what really counts in energy policy is not mechanisms, not bureaucracy, not processes. It's outcomes, and we're delivering. That's what this is all about.
Well, as you say, the emissions, you believe you'll get to these targets in a canter, the government is constantly saying. But, I mean, I put it to you that you're one-eyed, if not two-eyed, and furiously so on down prices and reliability for Australians. And you're driving that, and you're moving forward on that. But hasn't the by-election in Wentworth and hasn't the election result in Victoria not led to a rethink within the government, because it certainly has in the state government of New South Wales, that actually Australians care about an obligation on the emission side? Not just, OK, we'll get there anyway, but no, committing to something as being part of a trilemma, not a dilemma.
Well, we're committed. We're committed. It's really very simple. We have a 26%. We have a 26% target, and we're going to reach it. And we're not just going to reach it in 2030, which is when it's scheduled for. We're going to reach it in the early 2020s, Ticky. And this is really essential. You know, as Liberals, we believe that you go after the outcomes, and you only make an intervention if you're not going to reach it. Now we know we're going to reach it, and there's a reason for that. Is that we've got a 250% increase in solar and wind coming into the national electricity market in the next 3 years.
Yes.
In the next 3 years.
But
and what that means is we're going to reach our emissions reductions.
That obligation that you're talking about is really only within the energy sector. I mean, I think what is being talked about now, which would happen with an NEG, is an obligation across all sectors. Now, as Mark Butler said...
No, that's not right.
Is that not right?
Well, the focus for me, the focus for COAG, the focus for the policies in electricity over recent years has been the national electricity market. That's been the focus, and we're going to reach the target. And as I say, we're going to reach it way ahead of time. And what it means, and this is crucial, we've got a huge increase, about 11 gigawatts of new solar and wind coming into the system in the next 3 years or so. Now, the crucial point here is that you have to make sure when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, you've got 24/7 reliable on-demand capacity there available. That puts downward pressure on prices and it keeps the lights on. So that's the focus. But we know we can do that because we're doing so well on our emissions.
Yes, well, in your portfolio, this is all going swimmingly at the moment. But the environment or the environment portfolio, which is now separate to yours, that is challenged, and especially when it comes to the electorate at the moment. And clearly, the New South Wales government is looking at this and is looking at what their voters are saying, and their voters care about getting emissions much more up the scale. Now, do you not think that this is going to be a big factor come this general election?
Well, the Minister for Energy from New South Wales was talking about electricity. And as you rightly point out, it's going swimmingly. This is the point. Now, the challenge in electricity is not emissions, because we're doing extremely well on that. The challenge is driving prices down and keeping the lights on. You know, the business community is increasingly aware of this. We saw the Business Council come out just a few moments ago praising the outcome from the COAG Energy Council today, getting the retailer
the business community is also behind the NEG, and Don Harwin specifically said, he said the federal government has lost touch, and the way it's going at the moment is actually threatening business investment.
Well, we've got $15 billion of investment happening right now in electricity, absolutely unprecedented. And the challenge is to make sure that's balanced, Ticky, because alongside the variable renewable energy, the solar and wind, you've got to have energy that's dispatchable, that's on demand, that's 24/7. And we're focused on keeping that supply, that balance in the supply. And we're doing that a number of ways. The retailer reliability obligation, we're underwriting new capacity into the market, and we are saying to the big energy companies, we are going to do everything in our power to stop you from withdrawing capacity on short notice without replacing it. And that is absolutely essential to make sure every Australian gets a fair deal. And importantly, those big energy-using industries, the manufacturing industry, abattoirs, smelters, making sure that they all have access to the low-cost energy that keeps Australians in work in those industries and keeps those traditional industries that have been the backbone of Australia alive and prosperous.
Minister, where are we on price? You said the Energy Minister, Victorian one, Lily D'Ambrosio, got her sort of factors confused when she was talking about default or reference prices. What is going on? What's been agreed in COAG, and have you got a cap?
Well, we've been very clear. What we want to see is the loyalty tax gone. This is the high prices that are being charged to Australians who don't have time to go out and negotiate a contract each year with their energy retailer. They're getting slugged, and they have been particularly so in recent years, particularly in some states like Victoria. Now, we want to see that loyalty tax gone. We're not troubled about how it's done. We just want to see the outcome. We also want to see much easier
Did you get support for that within COAG?
Absolutely. I think everyone understands that the loyalty tax needs to go. That's well understood, and Victoria, to their credit, is doing the right things, making the right steps to make that happen. But we're also seeing the energy companies doing the right thing. On the 1st of January, we're going to see cuts of up to 15% for customers on standing offers. 500,000 Australians and small businesses are going to be better off as a result of that. So we're seeing the right steps, but we need also to drive prices down by putting extra supply in the market and retaining that crucial supply that's there 24/7 to keep the lights on and keep prices down.
Finally, Minister, what are you going to do if the New South Wales state government and indeed other Labor states, they all get together, a bit like what happened with the Treasury ministers last year, and they go outside the federal government, outside COAG, and say, well, look, if you're not going to cooperate, this is what the people want, and we're just going to do this deal without you on emissions?
Well, there's no need to, Ticky. I mean, we're going to reach our 26% emission reduction target. That's a strong target by international standards. Australia's a country that's growing faster than most. It's got high population growth, and so it's a very aggressive target, and we're going to reach it way ahead of time. So there's no need for that to happen. But I tell you, we're not going to get distracted. We are very focused on getting prices down, keeping the lights on, while we know we can reach those emission obligations. And we're not going to get distracted. We didn't get distracted today. We got the outcomes we wanted, and we're going to keep chasing and working hard and fighting for those outcomes that we want.
Minister, I really appreciate you stopping there on your way to the plane. I know you're very busy, so thank you so much.
Thanks, Ticky.
OK, well, coming up next, we're going to do a lot of thinking after the break. enigmaFIT CEO Phillip Campbell next.
Now, back to Ticky.
Right, well, now for something to get you all thinking, we're all still thinking, even if you're on holiday, so you can do some thinking too. A challenge for business leaders as well. I confess it's a spongy area for me that I have trouble getting my head around. Fluid thinking, it's the type of skill that as you get older, apparently you have less of. What you have more of is crystallised thinking. You get from experience, what you've learned and can interpret along the way. But in this age of massive disruption and pressure for business leaders to stay ahead of the curve, fluid thinking, the ability to be adaptive, flexible, innovative, strategic, perhaps think outside the square, as we used to say, is the big asset. Well, turns out that you can work at acquiring adaptive thinking, which can also make measurable differences to your performance and company performance. So says Phillip Campbell, who's a cognitive scientist and CEO of enigmaFIT, which is a business that specialises in equipping leaders in brain agility. And Phillip Campbell joins me now at the desk. Phillip, this is quite a different thing for me, but you've actually got some quite interesting clients. I mean, big corporate clients here and in the US.
Yeah, so we've got BCG in New York, so we're working with a large number of their senior partners to help them accelerate the expansion of their practice. And locally we work with Centre Group, who runs the Westfield shopping centres. Yes. We've worked with nearly 50 of their executives to equip them to better handle a major transformation process.
And they say it makes a big difference.
It does, yes. So basically...
Yeah, go on. So, it actually changes the way they approach things?
Yeah, so what we're literally doing is, from a cognitive science point of view, we're literally working with the brain's inherent plasticity. So our job is to rewire their brain, give them much better brain habits. So they can, every executive is facing a torrent of information overload, the digital disruption, government regulation, and the last one that people are putting on is they want them to be more agile.
Yes.
And so you can't do that with the current thinking style. Yeah. So our job is to, through a three-stage process, measure their brain efficiency, improve it, and then we retest it so that they can see the changes that they've got.
How do you actually go through that process? I mean, is it literally doing special sorts of IQ tests or brain tests?
Yeah, it's a special thing because the fluid intelligence is the non-verbal part of the brain. So crystallised intelligence is everything you've ever learned, and it's the knowledge. And it's great in steady-state times because you can leverage off past experience. Whereas fluid intelligence works on basically how we deal with going through uncharted waters.
It's a real sadness to me that apparently fluid intelligence drains from you as you get older, unless you do something about it.
I'm afraid so. Well, you and I are okay because we're still at the young adult stage, but for those, what happens is as the brain gets older, it decreases. Yeah. So the more senior executive you are, actually, it's the better for you to upgrade that fluid intelligence.
But we all know that, you know, we only use a portion of our brains over our lifetime, and we kill a lot of it through abuse. But equally, you're talking about accessing new parts of the brain?
Well, developing. Rather than accessing, we're actually developing. So what we do is we do a brain efficiency test. So we test 10 areas, such as the ability to analyse information, come up with new concepts, think laterally, strategic thinking, etc. And we just see how efficiently they process information in that area, because the brain is an information processing organ. Then we tailor the program because your brain is different than every other person's that we deal with, so we have to tailor it there. And then we do a program that takes about 10 to 12 weeks, and to develop fluid intelligence you need to do things, and you need to do harder and harder things and repeat them more and more, because that's the way the brain develops a new neural pathway.
Yeah, the first time you do something, like building a bridge over a chasm. You know, it's difficult crossing it, then the next time, then the next time, the next time it gets easier and easier.
Yeah, that's exactly the way it works.
OK, now, the cynic in me would say, right, you set these parameters, you say this is what these girls and boys have to do when they go in for this thing, and then you set the test at the end of it for the work that you had done. And of course people are going to score well because you've actually driven them in that direction. What actually makes people believe that it really does make a difference practically out in the real world?
Well, we leveraged off the work of an uber cynic who basically had the same attitude as you. And we had 30 data points, and he said, right, I'm an engineer, I'm going to evaluate each of these. And he gave us a score of 28.5 out of 30 as to how well it resonated. So from that point of view, he was able to give it high face validity. And the same thing, the people know they've changed before we actually retest them, but they want to validate it because they've put in 2 to 3 months of good practice to be able to achieve that.
So it really does make a practical difference. It's not like, I mean, when I went on a speed reading course years ago, I remember I achieved massive speeds, but proportionately I absorbed about, you know, less by the amount of time that I increased my speed reading.
So that was a net zero sum game there, basically.
But you're saying it really does, it really does make a difference. So what do these courses cost?
Well, they're in the order of a senior coaching program, so somewhere around 15 to 20,000 per person for a one-on-one program with the senior people. With the high potentials, it's somewhere around 10 to 12,000 per person.
Different from New York, doing it in New York to Australia?
Well, in New York, it's they're more upper.
Differently over there?
Well, I'll tell you what. Talking about being cynical. They're uber cynical over there. So basically, but it's quite interesting. They're very pragmatic. So they come in and say, tell me what it's about. And they say, look, pretty much, if what you're saying works as a high upside, there's low risk because of the calibre of companies that you work with from there. And the investment, you know, isn't all that high. So we'll do a test and learn with a group of people, and then other people say, well, I don't know what they had, but I'll have some of that too. Yeah. So they test that cynicism by empirically putting people through the program.
All right, well, you've made me think. Phillip Campbell, thank you very much.
OK,
nice
thank you, Ticky.
Well, that's all for the show tonight. Tomorrow night, Australian businessman and former Fairfax Media chairman Roger Corbett. See you tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. or tonight on Catch Up at 10 p.m. Thanks for your company.